Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with Hanapin. We'll be focusing on predictions for online marketplaces in 2020, and I'm joined here today with Brian from Feedonomics. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right on in. So I'm going to go ahead and let Brian introduce himself, and then I'll introduce myself. Brian, go ahead.
Awesome, thanks. Hey guys, I'm Brian Roizen, the co-founder and chief architect of Feedonomics, and we are a full-service product feed platform that helps merchants, retailers, agencies, brands, and pretty much everyone in between get their product data syndicated over to many of the channels we'll be talking about today, including Google, of course, Amazon, Facebook, Instagram, and many, many others.
Great. And like I said, I'm Alaina Thompson. I'm a growth marketing manager at Hanapin. I've been with Hanapin for 3.5 years, and I started out working in paid media. So I helped manage paid search and social and shopping for several different clients of ours during that time. And then over the course of this year, I've slowly been transitioning over to our internal marketing team, where I'm testing growth projects for both marketing and some cross-departmental projects as well. So, but all of that being said, I've still been working with our e-com clients all the way up until yesterday and today. And so I'm really excited for this particular topic because e-com has been a huge focus of mine for the last several years. So really excited to share all of our predictions with you guys. Before we get going into the webinar, just a quick introduction to Hanapin if you're unfamiliar. We are a digital marketing agency and we focus on paid search, paid social, conversion rate optimization, and a few other solutions you can see here across a wide variety of industries. We also produce PPC Hero, the blog, and HeroConf, which is a conference in both the US and in London. So we are really focused on paid media, and that's why we host webinars like this. We want to help train up the industry and share what we're learning and learn from you all. So excited to get this going today. If you want to join the conversation, please include the hashtag ThinkPPC in your Twitter tweets, or you can use the webinar question box to send us questions. We will have a Q&A at the end. We're going to do a quick poll question. You should see a pop-up where you can answer if you so choose. I'm sure Brian can relate to this as well, but here at Hanapin, we're working with clients of all different sizes, all different kinds of budgets. This webinar is not specific to any level of budget, whether you're a small biz or a very large enterprise size brand. You should be exploring different marketplaces. And so we're really excited to share all of what we know about those marketplaces today and talk through some of our predictions as well. So we'll just wrap up that poll and move on to our next slide. So we've got the agenda here. We are going to talk through some online marketplace predictions per the State of PPC report, which is a report that Hanapin releases every year. It includes e-commerce brands and retail brands. So there's a lot of really good takeaways that we can pull from that are not even really predictions. It's more of what advertisers have already told us that they plan to spend next year and what they're excited about in the industry as well as fearful of. So we'll talk through that and kind of set the stage for where the whole industry is going. And then we'll get more specific into the big two, obviously, which is Google Shopping and Amazon, and then some unexpected results from less common marketplaces that maybe you're unfamiliar with, and some of Brian's predictions specifically for those less common marketplaces that Feedonomics has a lot of experience with. So really excited to talk through that. All right, so we'll just jump in here. Like I said, we're starting with an overarching view of what's been happening in the industry based on what hundreds of digital marketers have told us via the State of PPC Survey. So we know that 55% of marketers say that their PPC budget is bigger than it was 12 months ago. There's a couple big reasons for this from our perspective. Definitely rising cost per click in those more saturated platforms, especially Google. And then because of those rising CPCs, we're also seeing a lot of brands trying to diversify their advertising mix across multiple platforms, which generally means more of a PPC investment year over year. A few additional statistics that are backing that up that we've found, that specifically 64% of brands are planning to increase their PPC budget in the next 12 months. So rather than a prediction, this is really just pure data based on what our surveyors said. And again, whether this is online marketplaces or some of the other ad platforms, the same trends still apply. So we're seeing rising CPCs in the more saturated markets. And so that means brands need to spend more to make the same amount of revenue year over year in certain platforms, or they're diversifying their investment year over year. So definitely a trend that we expect to continue into 2020. And, case in point, like I said, I've still been working with some e-commerce brands here at Hanapin as of late. And just over the last week, we've found that one of our smaller business e-com clients has seen an increase in Google Shopping CPCs over the last 30 days of 10%. And this was largely due to some increased competition from eBay and Amazon, which, as many of you may know, that's really hard to compete with when you're a small business. And so thinking through what's happening in the industry and then talking through the predictions really are going to help us create a better strategy for the small business moving into 2020 and trying to anticipate some of those moves from the bigger marketplaces like eBay and Amazon. A few other notes here from State of PPC. So in terms of the budget, we're seeing that a lot of agencies are, of course, planning to pitch Google. I don't think there's any surprise there, whether that's new ad types or new shopping campaign types. Not a lot of surprise, like I said. What was surprising to me here is that we have a lot of advertisers that are ready to pitch Instagram more than they're ready to pitch Amazon. And some of this is going to be skewed by the fact that there's B2B and B2C people answering this survey. But still, you would think with the size of the Amazon marketplace that we would have a higher percentage of agencies ready to pitch Amazon. I would estimate, based on my experience, that what's happening here is, as advertisers, we're all very familiar with Facebook. And so branching out into Instagram ads, whether it's some of the new shopping ads, which we'll talk about a little bit later within Instagram, or just regular e-com Instagram ads, advertisers are more familiar with those because we're more familiar with Facebook than we are Amazon. And so I think it's going to be crucial for Amazon in 2020 to make it easier for advertisers to enter the Amazon platform and then to figure out how to use it and how it's different from the platforms we're used to. And then we'll talk about Pinterest a bit later. Brian's got some really interesting takeaways there and predictions for Pinterest in 2020. We've also found that while we're not going to be speaking extensively today about YouTube because it's not really a marketplace, it is something that if you're an e-commerce or retail advertiser, you need to be thinking about your YouTube presence. You can see here, Think with Google did a study and found that consumers have watched 50,000 plus years of product review videos on mobile in the last 2 years. So what you're seeing there is a complete shift in the shopping journey. And if you're not adjusting for this and creating tutorial videos and things like that for your shoppers, then you're not really supplementing your online marketplace action and you're not really building that top of funnel as much as you could be if you're not using video tutorials. So something to keep in mind if you are looking into expanding your marketplace activity, you might also want to be expanding your video presence. And we're not obviously going to read through all of this, but I wanted to share just a little bit more about that from one of our YouTube experts here at Hanapin. We can expect or you should be trying to get more of those top of funnel users, like I said, by using YouTube, and then you can use that to lead into more conversion opportunity through your direct and paid channels, whether that's Amazon, Google Shopping, Instagram, etc. Getting that brand awareness out via YouTube is part of the new shopping journey. And so really it's not really should you get into YouTube, it's just how long are you going to wait to get into YouTube? It's pretty critical for e-commerce companies at this point to have a presence there. That being said, we do expect to see more tools rolling out from Google this year to make it easier for advertisers to get into YouTube. So the biggest problem right now is for small businesses and medium-sized businesses, it's not very easy to come across video assets. And we've seen Google released a bumper machine, as they called it, to help small to medium-sized businesses create new videos. But we expect that more tools will probably roll out in 2020 to aid in that effort on Google's part. And finally, as it relates to online marketplaces, we've seen that an overwhelming majority of survey respondents to the state of PPC are really not comfortable with the lack of transparency and the lack of control with AI and machine learning. So obviously this is a broader issue that's not just online marketplace specific, but we do see a lot of these kinds of AI tools popping up in those marketplace platforms. So that might be smart bidding within Google or dynamic ads within Facebook. It's becoming more and more prevalent, and if you're an advertiser, you're getting a lot of pressure probably from your Google reps, your Facebook reps to adopt all of these different types of AI, and there's still a lot of uncertainty around it when it comes to the advertiser perspective. So we'll dive into that a little bit more throughout this presentation, but just something to keep in mind. You're probably in 2020 going to get more pressure from your reps to use some of these tools, and I'm not going to say don't do it, but at the same time, we definitely need to proceed with caution. So we'll talk about that a bit later. Right now, we're going to dive into Google Shopping specifically. And I'm going to pass it over to Brian to talk through Google Shopping actions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alaina. I'm really excited to be telling you guys a little bit more about kind of the evolution of Google Shopping from, it being a completely free model with Frugal to Google Shopping in the PLA space to really becoming more of a marketplace with the PLA option that we see today. It's been a really, really interesting evolution over the last couple of years. And I think a lot of it is spurred from Amazon itself. I think Google's kind of recognizing that they need to compete with Amazon, especially if over 50% of product searches are starting on Amazon. It's a major worry for them. So they need to have that kind of functionality inside of Google where the purchase can be ridiculously simple. So with that, what Google launched is Google Shopping Actions. And it's basically Google's push into becoming a marketplace to compete with Amazon.
Here are some results from a search.
What's funny is I actually just triggered the OK Google on my phone. And actually what's kind of interesting is Google Shopping Actions results are actually in that, so you can order directly from your phone as well. So it's really interesting how that evolution works. But in terms of shopping actions, it's not a pay-per-click model. There's still a Google Shopping pay-per-click component, but this actually drives traffic to Google Express, where now it's just going to be the shopping tab that you see inside of Google, and the sale happens on Google. So what's kind of interesting on this is that's kind of the marketplace component, where the sale is happening on your website versus on a marketplace itself. So on Amazon, of course, that sale happens on the marketplace, and on Google, that's exactly what they're trying to do. But Google is actually taking a very different tack, which is more merchant friendly than what Amazon is doing. Namely that users have their Google Wallet already saved, their credit card info is already on Google for the most part. So whenever you want to complete that purchase, it's pretty seamless. Google actually also gives you their email address for remarketing purposes, which is incredibly important because email marketing can account for anywhere from 20 to 40% sometimes of all of your lifetime value of a customer and getting them to purchase more items. So the other thing, as I just mentioned, is you're going to see this across several different surfaces. One of the most important is Google search. Google Express, which is now just the shopping tab. If you see next to the All tab, you can just click in there and Google's actually showing results in there already. And then of course on Google Assistant. So anyone with a Google Home like me or Google Assistant on your phone, you can actually buy items directly from there. Could you go to the next? So we've actually been one of Google's partners for testing this, and we have several hundred clients already live on Shopping Actions. And one of the case studies that is actually featured on the Google Shopping Actions page on Google's site is one that we have with Ambush Skateboarding. This was a really interesting test. We actually published this on Search Engine Land and a few other blogs as well, where we basically showed, is it better to just have Google Shopping or to also combine it with Shopping Actions? And the results are surprising, actually, because the worry is that one is going to cannibalize the other. What we actually found is that what Google is mostly doing, especially for very detailed search terms, is they're often showing the Google Shopping Actions results as the first two slots in Google search by default almost. And you guys might have noticed this if you just do Google searches for your own products, but this is often the case. And so what we found was that by not doing it, you're actually doing a huge disservice because you're basically losing those two slots and reducing the probability that you'll ever appear there. So what Ambush found was that they were able to increase total conversions and revenue, which was kind of crazy. Honestly, it was a little bit unexpected, but in light of how we often see them positioning the Shopping Actions results, it makes sense. What we've also seen is what I'm going to show you guys in the next slide and talk a little bit about, if you could go to the next one, are the predictions for it. So some of these are predictions and others of these are our current reality that literally took place in the last week or two. So you might be able to see on the screenshot on the left that Google is now featuring, when you click on that shopping tab, the buy on Google results first and foremost before they feature the other options across the web. That's a huge change. Before they used to kind of combine everything in one, and they used to have a little parachute icon that told you, is it a Google Shopping Actions result or is it just a normal retailer? So this is really interesting. Google is giving much more preference and prominence to these kind of results on the shopping tab. Now, what do I predict is going to happen here? One, this is going to cause more and more merchants to do it. I think Google, as of this point, has several thousand merchants already doing Google Shopping Actions, but that's still a small subset. I think there's probably about 100,000 total Google Shopping retailers. So that's a small percentage. So as I imagine and predict, this is going to only increase, and the results are going to become more saturated with Google Shopping Actions results. So this is a very interesting one. And if you look at how Amazon has kind of evolved as well, what they have is they basically have shopping actions plus they have sponsored ads. So they're kind of double dipping. And I think Google's going to potentially go in that exact same direction. That's, of course, my prediction. We'll see how it pans out. But I would expect that Google is going to have that same sponsored ad component plus checkout component and commission rates that Amazon has as well in the near future.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, that's really interesting, the evolution of those shopping actions. So curious to see if you're right. So like I said, we'll talk more about machine learning because that's obviously a huge topic or a huge trend that we're going to see continue into 2020. So as it pertains to Google Shopping, what we've seen, again, from the state of PPC, all the digital marketers that answered specifically said that on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable are they with the transparency and control that they have with machine learning across all the platforms? And the largest number was a 3 out of 10. And then you'll see the bulk of them were between 3 and 7. So advertisers are certainly not very comfortable with the transparency and control. And what we've seen on the agency side, as it pertains to Google Shopping is that means advertisers are still very hesitant to try smart shopping campaigns. And it's been interesting because it's obviously something that Google is really pushing for. And there are certain instances where it can make a lot of sense. Brian made the point the other day that it can be really great for small businesses that don't necessarily have the time to invest a lot of strategy and setup and structure into their shopping campaigns. But beyond that, we haven't seen a lot of success with these campaigns, at least with our agency tests that we've run. So I think what we're going to see continuing into 2020 is that Google will continue to push these campaigns and advertisers are going to continue to push back due to that lack of control and transparency. And maybe Google can kind of try and give us more tools to give us that transparency so that the lack of control is a little bit less scary. But if that doesn't happen on Google's side, then I don't really anticipate a lot of adoption of these campaigns. Again, that's just a personal opinion. None of the opinions we give today or predictions are from the actual platforms themselves. Just want to make sure I say that. But alongside that, I think, if I'm right and we don't get a lot more control or transparency for those kinds of campaigns, then advertisers are going to continue finding other ways to save time and money with shopping campaigns. We all know that they can be exhausting in terms of time spent. So I think we'll see more and more advertisers leaning on scripts, on feed management software, and on platform diversification. So getting outside of Google Shopping and maybe getting into Pinterest or Verizon Media, which we'll talk about today. A couple other shopping predictions here. I'm stealing this from one of my colleagues, but we are seeing, similar to what Brian alluded to, Google is trying to keep up with Amazon in a number of different ways. And so in 2020, what that could also include are an additional focus on enhanced visuals, customer reviews, removing friction in the buying process, which by that I mean removing or retaining customer purchase information and making it voice assistant friendly. Also, Amazon's obviously had a huge impact on the consumer expectation when it comes to free shipping. So, we do predict that there's going to be more free shipping, or as Zach says here, the facade of free shipping within Google, just trying to keep up with Amazon and what consumers now expect due to Amazon's 2-day free shipping Prime deals that we can get. So really going to be interesting to see how Google does continue to try and keep up with Amazon and vice versa. So speaking of, we're going to talk about Amazon now. So we've got, again, several higher level stats that we're seeing across the board. For the advertisers that are using Amazon already, 65% of them are seeing some growth within Amazon ads, and 26% of them are seeing a lot of growth. So that's really, really interesting because it's more than what we see generally with Google Shopping. A lot of advertisers have started with Google Shopping a long time ago, and so the percentage of those advertisers that are seeing large growth are not necessarily as high. But Amazon's just newer for advertisers, and so because of that, Amazon's trying to adjust and make it more user-friendly. So you can see here, they're focused on the Amazon Learning Console, which they released this year to help advertisers learn those basics of Amazon advertising so they can get more and more adoption of Amazon ads. And like I said earlier, it's interesting that advertisers and agencies are ready to pitch Google, they're ready to pitch Instagram, but they're maybe not quite as ready to pitch Amazon. So hopefully something like Amazon Learning Console and maybe a few additional tools in 2020 will help advertisers to feel more comfortable so that we can all take advantage of some of this growth before it gets too saturated. Alongside that, another huge opportunity that we've seen within Amazon is Amazon DSP. And while this might be a bit of an exaggerated statement, it is slowly taking over the programmatic world. That's a whole other conversation. If you're not familiar with programmatic or Amazon DSP, I highly recommend that you look into it. But DSP mainly just stands for demand side platform, and it gives advertisers the opportunity to not only get a huge amount of reach and new audiences, but to also garner a lot of valuable insights and performance data from those ads. So it's becoming one of the largest DSPs, and if you're in the programmatic world, I highly recommend that if you're not already using Amazon DSP, that you look into it, because we've seen a ton of opportunity for growth with our clients. And we also expect to see a lot more growth in 2020. To back that up, just have another quote here from one of our directors that's been very hands-on with Amazon DSP over this last year. She mentions that we've seen improvements in reporting capabilities, targeting options, including the ability to target competitor ASINs. So just Amazon trying to give us more options to reach the right audience and to compete at a higher level. So lots of growth opportunity in 2020 within DSP. And then I'll hand it over to Brian to talk through some of the broader trends that we've seen for Amazon across the board.
Thanks, Alaina. Yeah, those are some really interesting insights into what's happening on the advertising side of Amazon. When I look at Amazon over the last year, we put a lot of emphasis into building out sort of the cornerstone building components of how do we list products on Amazon, because if you can't list products, you can't even advertise them. But the three metrics that I always keep in mind are these. The first one, which I kind of alluded to earlier, is that over 55% of all product searches are starting on Amazon. That's a huge one. If you're not on Amazon, you just reduce your entire addressable market by 50%. So that's a really key one. I know I am ridiculously guilty of it. I buy a lot of things on Amazon. And the other two metrics are 92% of users who start on Amazon purchase on Amazon. That means that most people are pretty lazy and are not going to price compare online, on Google Shopping, or on a number of price comparison channels. And the last one is that most sales are happening through the buy box. So that means people are not clicking see other sellers, or only 20% of people are clicking that, which is not most people. So these are three things to keep in mind as you think about your Amazon strategy. Amazon's e-commerce market share is increasing every single year. And these are the three metrics that I try to keep in mind. What we've seen over the last year is that brands and manufacturers who, rightfully so, have been kind of scared of Amazon and not doing it for a very long time, have jumped aboard, mostly to define the customer experience. If you look at headlines, you'll see that Nike as well as Apple are now on Amazon. Some of them are through first party versus third party, but a lot of brands and manufacturers are jumping aboard to define that experience. So I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. You could go to the next slide. So the importance of listing optimization. What we found is that 70% of Amazon users don't go beyond that first page of search results. And if you look at search results from 5 years ago to today, you're going to see that there are a lot of sponsored ads in there. It's actually very similar to what Google did. These are exactly the same kind of PLA-like ads that appear on search results. And some people have ad blocks, so they won't see them, but a lot of people do not. So showing up on that first page is really, really key, regardless of whether you're doing ads or not doing ads. And how do you actually ensure that you do that? You can go to the next slide. We answer that. And the answer is with feed optimization. At a very high level, there are several ways of listing your products on Amazon. One is you could list them one by one, which is a very, very manual process. And you can imagine if you change prices or inventory changes on your website, now you have to go back to Amazon Seller Central and change everything one by one, which is a very, very time-consuming step. It might be okay if you have less than 20 products, but if you have more, it can be, you'll be spending all of your days doing that. So what feed optimization is the second way of, in bulk, sending product data to Amazon through their MWS APIs. And what we mean by feed optimization is, one, making sure that your data is clean, that there's no weird HTML going on there, that you don't have missing values, your brands are entered correctly, and you've mapped your attributes correctly to the specifications of Amazon or any channel for that matter. But two, and this is really the heart of what it takes to show up on the first page of search results, you want to make sure that your product titles and your other attributes are as relevant to what the user is searching for. This is probably not news to anyone. This is exactly how any kind of search algorithm works, including Google, including Microsoft, including Walmart.com, eBay.com, really any channel. It's all about, without diving into their AI and machine learning algorithms, at a high level, they want to make sure that the words that someone searches for are in your product data. And the consequences of them not being in the product data are, one, you're not going to show up at all. And two, if you do show up, the amount that you have to spend on your bidding is usually very high. So those are the two key reasons to do it. So I want to just show you guys a quick example of why it matters and when it matters. So when someone is at the very beginning of their research process or their buying journey, they don't necessarily know the brand, the model number, the color of the product they want. So if they're looking to take up running, they might just be looking for running shoes. But after they do their research, if they're a compulsive buyer, they'll have an answer within seconds, or if you're more like me, in a week or so. But after you do that research, what you'll find is that your product search is going to change drastically. It's going to go from running shoes that you see in this picture here to Nike Air Max running shoes, size 12 black. So that's very different. And in general, what we find is that the more attributes and the more nouns, adjectives, descriptive keywords are in a product search, the more likely that user is to convert. They're more bottom of the funnel. They're ready to buy. They've literally put everything in there. They might just be price comparing at this point, or just looking to buy that item because they know exactly what they want. And this is the key time to get them, basically, not when they're necessarily in that beginning of the search process and don't even know what they want. So this is where relevancy matters most, and this is what we focus on. Part of what we do is we can actually look at converted search terms from Google Analytics data as well as Google Ads data and see what is missing from your product titles that is in those converted search terms. And we can use those insights to populate and ensure that you actually show up better. But as I kind of alluded to earlier, brands and manufacturers are the ones who benefit the most from this. And the reason is because if you're just a drop shipper, you're going to just attach to an existing listing. But if you're the brand and manufacturer, you get to set the experience for every user. You're the one who has control over your title, description, product images, and every other feature and specification attribute that you actually send to Amazon. So it's even more crucial to be doing this if you're a brand and manufacturer and are approved on the Amazon brand registry. Could you go to the next slide, Alaina? Thanks. The other component that's really important to keep an eye on, and my prediction is that merchants are going to be more and more attuned with this, I would say it's historically been very overlooked, and that has to do with error resolution. So when we log into an Amazon Seller Central account, when we're doing a feed audit or a review of their account, we often find that between 10 and 30% of their products are totally ineligible to be listed because of errors on the listing side. And oftentimes you only see this if you download the report, and it's kind of hidden away in the Amazon Seller Central interface, but it's so important to look at. And sometimes these errors can be very, very simple to fix. We built an interface in Feedonomics that can easily address these kinds of listing errors, because if you can't even list those products, you can't advertise them, you can't sell them at any level. So it's very important to be looking at this. And in the interface we created, and you can of course do this manually in Excel, it's just going to be a little bit annoying, but in our interface we've created a list of your products. And what often happens is Amazon's value is different than your value. Your value might be red, but Amazon's value is blue. So you may not want to fix that, but let's say your value is navy blue and Amazon's value is blue. You may want to accept their value because, one, it may actually be more correct than yours, but that way you're actually capable of listing that product at all. or in the case of the second one, which is XL versus extra large. So you may want to accept that because it's really just a different stylistic guide, but it's the same actual value. So this is a very important component that we think is overlooked, but that more and more merchants are going to pay attention to. The same way that merchants do it for Google Shopping and pay attention to errors and disapprovals, we think the same thing is going to happen there as well, which means that Amazon is going to get more saturated with more listings, but something to keep an eye on as well. Do you go to the next slide? Thanks. So what do we predict in terms of Amazon? Definitely that it's going to become more saturated for ad spend. I think what's also kind of interesting is there's a lot, if you read the news, a lot of negativity about Amazon right now, about how they're promoting their own products, their own white labeled products ahead of everyone else. And in terms of the lack of visibility you get with AI or machine learning or bidding algorithms, like it's almost an unfair playing field, right? So my guess is that Amazon will either expand and ignore all the legislation that's probably coming towards them or start to mitigate it. Probably the latter. And I think that they're going to be probably pushing less as time goes on. So it may be an interesting thing just to keep a pulse on, but we think that Q4 growth is going to be far more competitive than it is even now. And I think 2020, a lot of brands and manufacturers that have kind of held off, you can only do that for so long, because I'm guessing that the number of product searches that start on Amazon will be even more than 55% next year. So it's a very, very important one. So we'll see if we can avoid a Waterworld type doomsday scenario, but we definitely expect it to be more popular. Great. And so Pinterest is a really interesting one that is really spurring and growing. Before, you used to have a really large budget to even be an approved advertiser for it, but Pinterest, as of this year, has opened it up to far more advertisers. And what's kind of interesting about Pinterest is people do a lot of research on products before they buy it. So these are important metrics to keep in mind directly from Pinterest. They have over 300 million monthly users, and 25%, so a quarter of them, are buying an item they first discover on Pinterest. And most of them have discovered a new product or brand. It's an amazing social platform for creating lists of items that are on your dream list or things that you want. So now by Pinterest allowing you to easily click on it, go to a website and buy it, that's a huge, huge takeaway and something that could be incredibly valuable to advertisers. Next, please. So what do we predict for Pinterest? There have been a lot of developments literally just this year. They've opened it up to significantly more advertisers, and we've seen, I think, probably over 100 just in the last month or two jumping on board to try it out. Pinterest also seems to be making a lot of developments into visual search tools. And this is like a crazy application where you can take a photo of an item that you see someone wearing or something you see in a catalog. You can upload it to Pinterest and they'll show you similar objects. Right now it's just across fashion, apparel, and the home categories, but I would expect that this is going to expand to a lot of other places where if you see a cool looking dress, you can just take a picture and immediately see ones that are similar to it. And of course, I imagine that there's going to be an advertising component to this where you'll see sponsored results as well. So if you have a catalog that people are already pinning, items that people are pinning on Pinterest, this is kind of a no-brainer, obvious one to try just to see if you can drive more traffic from it. So I definitely recommend looking into it. The other one that we've seen is, and we've heard feedback that when Facebook dynamic product ads first started a couple of years ago, they were incredibly unsaturated. The CPAs, the return on ad spend, was amazing. But we're kind of in not a new day, but a couple of years later, and Facebook dynamic product ads are not as unsaturated. So one of the new, it's almost the analog of it, is Verizon Media. They have a dynamic product ad product that also has native ads, and it allows you to target exclusive properties like all the former Yahoo ones, Yahoo Finance, Yahoo News, Yahoo Fantasy Leagues, as well as many leading blogs that are owned by AOL, like Huffington Post, AOL, Engadget, TechCrunch. Why, of course, beyond these exclusive properties, is 60 billion monthly impressions. That's a lot. So if you want to capitalize on that, this is a really interesting one to try. We've seen a lot of clients want to try this, especially when they've already experienced success on Facebook. It's a really obvious one to try, and it's not very saturated from what we've seen. And these are just some interesting metrics with ROAS across some of the top Verizon Media partners as recently as last year, Q4. What do we actually predict? If you could go to the next slide. What we've seen is while Facebook dynamic product ads haven't really changed much over the last few years with their carousel ads, Verizon Media is pushing some interesting boundaries. What we've seen is that there's some really interesting dynamic remarketing ad formats, such as when you're going through a Yahoo News feed. As you scroll on your phone, you'll actually get a full page vertical ad canvas, as you can see here for Nordstrom. And it's very, very compelling. Like it's not something that you'd see just doing Google remarketing or Facebook dynamic product ads. It's more engaging from what I've seen. And of course, the other key note is it's very unsaturated. So the return on ad spend and CPA from what we've seen is very low. Now, this is obviously going to change as merchants seize on this opportunity, and those numbers will drive up. But this is a really interesting one to try. I would say that if you haven't tried Facebook dynamic product ads, you should probably try that first, prove it out. But once you do and see success on it and sort of reach that saturation point, this could be a great one to try because it's, for all intents and purposes, a very similar product, but it's across exclusive properties that are owned by Yahoo and Verizon Media. Cool. The next one that I want to talk a little bit about is a very new one that you may have read about in the last couple of months, and it's checkout on Instagram. Here's the basic premise. Don't worry about reading the text there. When Kim Kardashian posts a new dress or a new handbag or an item of jewelry in her Instagram newsfeed to all her millions and millions of followers, she no longer has to link to a Shopify store or to a retail website. People can click on that and literally buy the product. This is kind of insane because Instagram has over 1 billion accounts worldwide. They have incredibly strong engagement, and a lot of accounts already, or a lot of these users are already taking action by tapping on shopping posts to learn more about products. So this is a really interesting one that makes for a very seamless process. If you can go to the next slide. So how does it work? Here's a really good visual. So a user sees a product in their newsfeed, and it could be just part of a regular post. They click on it, and there's a button to check out. So if you've ever donated money to any cause on Facebook, they probably have your credit card information. And that's probably a huge percentage of users. So you can easily finish that purchase right there and then. But there is an order management flow that happens with any marketplace where you have to pull orders from Instagram checkout, bring it back to your e-commerce system, and then once your tracking number is ready and your item is shipped, you have to send it back. So we're one of Instagram's few partners for this checkout process and can easily automate it. What we expect is that this is going to expand, of course, to more and more advertisers. In terms of other predictions, we expect this is going to be a larger part of the whole Instagram experience. I would especially expect for people who have lots and lots of followers, probably around 100,000, this is going to open up to them more so. Of course, this is still in beta, so every single retailer that wants to get into this needs to be approved, but we're happy to help if you reach out to us. But it's a very interesting new marketplace inside of Instagram.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It's really interesting because it is such a new release. There's not a ton of data behind it yet, so really, really curious to see how that expands in 2020 and how quick a lot of our e-commerce brands are to adopt this new checkout option. And then same thing, if I can vouch for Pinterest, just as a user, if you all haven't tried that lens feature on just the regular Pinterest app as a user. I highly recommend testing it out next time you're at an IKEA or something like that. Take a picture of a sofa or a chair and see what Pinterest shows you after it searches for that visual. It's a really powerful tool, and that'll give you a better idea of kind of what the opportunity is there as an advertiser, especially in the apparel and the home space. All right, all of that being said, we've made predictions for all of the different platforms we talked about today and the broader paid media industry as a whole. So I wanted to leave you all with this before we go into Q&A. A lot of what we've seen both in surveys and just, at our conference or people responding to the blog is that people in our roles as PPC professionals are concerned with what's coming in terms of machine learning and AI in 2020 and beyond, and what does that mean for our roles. And I thought this was a really interesting perspective on it from our president, Jeff Allen. I won't obviously read all of this to you, but the main key point here is that we're probably going to become less and less of lever pullers and more of what he calls insight brokers. And what this means is we just need to continue developing our ability to take ideas and insights from all of the different data points that we're getting from all of the different platforms. And of course, there's a lot of great SaaS out there to help us connect a lot of those dots, but really being able to pull insights even from those platforms and then explain it back to your boss or your client and paint that picture for them of what the data means for them in their industry with their product. And so I'm just leave you with that because there's a lot going on in 2020 in online marketplaces alone, and a lot of AI that's coming in, but that doesn't mean that there's no room for us and our roles as PPC professionals. All right, before we get to Q&A, we just have a quick poll here, or not a poll, but rather a multiple choice question. If you would like a free feed audit from Feedonomics, you can go ahead and choose A. If you'd like more information on our conference, HeroConf, that's the second option, or all the above, no thanks. And just let us know if you'd like any of those. I can vouch for HeroConf. I go to the US conference and the London conference every year, and there's a lot of really, really intelligent digital marketers that show up and they get really into the weeds on a lot of the online marketplaces as well as a lot of other B2B strategies and broader paid media themes. So it's a really, really good place to go if you're looking for someone who does exactly what you do. Maybe you work alone at your company, you're the only one that does paid media. HeroConf's a really great place for you to meet like-minded marketers. And then I'm biased, but I've used Feedonomics too for my e-com clients, and I would highly recommend if you haven't had a feed audit before, it's definitely worth getting that free feed audit from Feedonomics. I've seen a lot of ROAS improvements with my clients that use it. So we'll go ahead and finish up that poll and then move on to Q&A. All right, so let me pull up our questions here. All right, so first question, what is your opinion on Scaggs, which is also known as single keyword ad groups, search ads? So Scaggs in search on Google Ads and Microsoft. Really good question. It's actually, I was just talking to a coworker about this yesterday. I would say Scaggs are dying. It's with the more and more automation in search campaigns, it's becoming less and less necessary to segment all of your ad groups out by the single keyword. I assume because we're talking about marketplaces, you're probably referring to single keywords that are products. We're just finding that we get better results when we're kind of grouping more and more keywords together. Obviously, you still need to have some segmentation in your account, and we're not moving over completely to fully automated campaigns and giving, the reins to Google. At the same time, we are trusting the algorithms to some extent. Google is on the back end. It's learning from so many millions of data points that we could never possibly try to analyze as humans. And it's doing it really, really quickly. So with all of those data points, there's enough machine learning and it's working well enough from what we've seen to trust more or less segmented ad groups. That, and we also have so many changes this year with like the exact match variance and phrase match variance with keywords that Google's kind of broadening the targeting of a keyword anyway. And so again, we're just finding those Scaggs to be less effective. All right, we'll move on to question 2. Let's see here. I think this is going to be a good question for Brian. So someone's asking, I have more than 5,000 products. I have my own tools to create them in bulk. My only problem is to optimize and adjust the bids for the keywords and the ad groups. Do you know a tool that can help me with the optimizing part? Now that I finished the question, I don't know if that applies to your experience at Feedonomics, Brian, but feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I can definitely give some input there. There are a few, it sounds like the problem you have is really around segmenting your bids better. And I see it all the time without going to bid management platforms like Kenshu and Marin or smart shopping campaigns. What I suggest doing is, here's the problem, like you've got 2 pairs of Nike shoes, one is autographed by Michael Jordan, the other is not. So one costs $10,000 and one costs $50, right? So there's a huge price discrepancy. And oftentimes when doing bids, you set it up based on category and brand. But I just gave you a scenario where the price is so different. So of course you can spend way more in bids on that more expensive item. So what we can do in Feedonomics is inside of your feed, and I suggest trying to do this whatever system you're doing it with, but try to segment your bids first based on price. You might find that there's a lot of variance inside of, you could have the same problem with dresses, with any category. So I first suggest segmenting it into bid buckets using custom labels. You have 5 of them. You can easily have over 1,000 segmentation groups inside of each one. So I suggest first do that. Then I suggest, what we're sometimes able to do for clients, depending on how they have e-commerce tracking and analytics set up, is we're able to pull Google Analytics data back into Feedonomics or Google Ads data back and create rules based on performance data, so ROAS and CPA. So you can say, these are my poor performing products because they have a very high CPA and a very low return on ad spend. So I'm going to put these into the low bid bucket. And then you can create a medium bid bucket, a high performing bid bucket, and so on, so that you can better segment your bids there as well. But short of using, Marin or Kenshu or manually or scripts to do it, there are some things you can do in the feed that can help better segment your products as well. Alaina, I don't know if you have some input, maybe more on the campaign side, but I thought I'd tackle it from the feed side.
Yeah, absolutely. So you covered a lot of it. I would say, shameless, well, I guess it's not even a shameless plug by definition, but a platform that we use a lot for adjusting the bids and the keywords at the ad group level when it comes to shopping is Optimizer. We've found that their search and shopping tools are just so efficient. And also, with the founder, Fred Valleys, being an ex-Googler, he really understands the ecosystem and what advertisers are thinking. And so I've just found that the tools and recommendations that come from Optimizer in terms of your bid adjustments at the keyword level are, they're not as, I guess you would say, out of touch as Google's recommendations can be within the platform. I just don't always trust all of the recommendations that come from Google within the UI, but with Optimizer, a lot of those bid recommendations are very helpful. So I would say that's probably the tool we rely on most here at Hanapin. Moving on to the next question, we have a few more minutes. Great question, especially since we actually didn't focus on this platform today. someone wants to know if Bing, also known as Microsoft Ads now, is it worth focusing on? I would say from the online marketplace perspective, classic paid media answer, it depends. I have had great success with it depending on the brand and the industry. So I would definitely say that a lot of times we get this question when advertisers are in Google in terms of, they're using the shopping campaigns and maybe search campaigns for their products and are looking for that next platform to jump into. If that's where you're coming from, I would say start with some audience research and determine if it makes more sense for you to jump into, maybe Facebook, maybe you're looking for a cheaper cost per click. And so you want to test out Verizon Media now that you've heard Brian's take on it. Just do the audience research. But I would say Microsoft, in my experience, the audience does tend to be a little more affluent on average. So if you have a higher end product, you might have some really good luck in terms of return on ad spend in Bing. Something else that I've seen is sometimes especially depending on the industry, the average age with Microsoft can skew a little bit higher than Google. So if you have an affluent audience or a slightly older audience, I would say definitely check out Microsoft Ads, because I did that for one brand and they are selling classic car parts and car parts in general. And so the return on ad spend with Bing has just been incredible. So I definitely would not knock it, but do your research. If you only have enough time and money to expand into one more platform, make sure that it's the right platform for your audience.
Yeah, that's really, really sound advice. And just in terms of general trends that I'm seeing, in case you guys haven't kept up with it, but Microsoft is using the Chromium engine for their Internet Explorer next version. Why? Because it's going to look exactly and feel exactly like Chrome. So I would expect as people install a new version of Windows 10 or get a new Windows 10 computer, more and more of them are not going to switch to Chrome or Firefox. They're going to continue using it. And guess what the search engine is that's by default, right? It's going to be Microsoft's. As well as if you are catering to, in addition to more affluent or an older demographic, also if you're catering to gamers, because Xbox has the default search provider as well, which is going to be Microsoft. So I totally agree with Alaina. It's going to depend. If you're seeing success on Google Shopping and your volume is very, very high, you're not going to see, most large advertisers are definitely using both. But if you're smaller, you should definitely be deliberate, maybe do a test on it. But I would still first stick to Google Shopping and prove it out to yourself that you can get those results.
Yeah, really good point there, Brian, especially about the gamers. That hadn't crossed my mind, but it's a really important audience and a huge audience. Last question, I'm going to direct this to you, Brian. We just have one more minute, but this one seems very specific to your experience. Are the Amazon recommendations the same if we use Vendor Central versus Seller Central? Like, for example, resolution, excuse me.
They're a little bit different. Oftentimes, the errors you get on the Seller Central side are going to be far more detailed, whereas on the vendor side, because it uses Amazon's sort of legacy EDI solution, the error resolution is kind of a nightmare for anyone to work through. I know, having done it firsthand. So the recommendations are slightly different. If you want, we can definitely sync up afterwards and kind of go more into what those actual errors look like on each one of them. But I recommend staying on top of it, because any products you're not able to list because of errors or disapprovals means, one, you can't sell them, and two, you can't advertise them. So definitely keep a pulse on it.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Well, that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you all for such interesting and engaging questions. And thank you for joining us. We hope to see you on the next webinar.
Thanks, guys. Bye.